Hello and welcome in to the Fantasy Football Forecast. I'm Trevor Scott here with my co-host Matt Giraldi,
What's going on, guys?
and we'll be turning our attention over to the AFC East for these next four videos. We're very excited to get into this division for a fantasy perspective. There's a lot that has changed. There's some bad teams, potentially some sleeper teams. So we're very excited. And for our 13th team overall and first team of the AFC East, we'll be going over the Buffalo Bills.
Buffalo Bills, man, had a pretty good year last year. They won a playoff game. They ended up losing to Kansas City in the divisional round. Great game, tough pill to swallow. Just running into Patrick Mahomes is just brutal in the postseason. And looking back at their regular season, they actually fired their offensive coordinator week 10, which was bizarre because at least it felt as if that was kind of when Diggs fell off and when James Cook kind of caught fire. But they're
Yep.
retaining him as their OC this year, so we'll see what happens. They lost Stephon Diggs, they lost Gabe Davis, who we talked about last week. Brought in Curtis Samuel. He's kind of a safety blanket. We've seen him always kind of be a hot starter and a reliable, third option. But looking at the draft, they made me very happy and drafted one of my favorite players overall in wide receiver Keon Coleman. So he was actually my fifth ranked wide receiver. If you guys haven't checked out our wide receiver rankings video pre-draft, go ahead and look into Coleman because he's just an athletic freak. He's tall. He can grab the ball out of the air. He had a bad 40 time, but he also had the fastest gauntlet drill, which kind of rings similar to like a Puka Nakua. Not projecting that from this season, but yeah, someone I'm very excited about. I'll throw it to you for the fantasy side.
Yeah, and I think just let's build straight off of the receiver here because they lost Diggs and Davis and they replaced him with Keon Coleman. Obviously, Curtis Samuel as well, but the weapons are going to be very different here this offseason, which I think is going to present a very, very interesting buy opportunity on the Bills pass catchers. None of these guys are going inside the top 45. So none of these guys are going to be top 10, 11 round picks. Are probably going to start getting taken in round 12. And thinking about how much Josh Allen has elevated the play of his receivers, namely Stephon Diggs, as the number one, there's a major target share here that has to go to somebody. It's not all going to go to Kincaid. So one of these guys is going to end up being way more valuable than they get drafted to be. And Keon Coleman is one of these rookie receivers that isn't going to get a lot of hype because his 40 time was so bad. It was 4.6 plus. And so, there's legitimate questions about him being able to get deep on corners. How much respect is he going to get? Are they going to play way press coverage because they don't have any fear of him beating them over the top? Those are all questions that I think we're going to get answers to as we get further in camp and we hear how he's doing against those type of defenses. But there is a lot of upside here. He was a very productive player. He was a very good player in college. And they traded down with the Chiefs, and then they traded down again into the second round with, I'm blanking on who they traded with the Bears. No, it wasn't the Bears. Sorry about that. I forget who they traded down, but they traded down twice because they were confident that they could get Coleman, and he was their guy. So instead of just sticking, they accumulated more draft stock, still took him anyways. And so I think that there's a lot of opportunity here for him to outproduce his 49 draft position by quite a bit here. So, and Curtis Samuel, he's always stable. He's always steady. He's probably going to be very targeted early in the year as they try and get their footing on offense. So he always kind of seems to be more productive than he should be. Even in Washington, he was always that way. So, if you're looking for a possible flex starter late in the draft for week one, Curtis Samuel could easily be your guy here.
Yeah, I agree. And just adding to your point on Keon Coleman, it's not like they kind of went into this saying, hey, Keon, meet Josh Allen. Josh Allen was like, go get this guy. And what we talked about
Yes.
with the CJ Stroud and Tank Dell episode, with that's what Stroud did a year ago. I just think, he's kind of putting his mark down with him. And I think that's going to be a great connection. And at 49, I mean, that's going to rise if any reports from camp are solid about the report. But I'm going to be all over him this year. I've already got him on a bunch of best ball teams. So I'm very excited about him. And if you haven't checked him out, he's a great personality too. All his interviews are hilarious. So definitely he's going to be a very popular player very quickly up in Buffalo. And I guess transitioning
Yeah.
to another popular player up in Buffalo, Josh Allen, he's locked in at QB1.
Wait,
I want to
before we move
go
off
ahead.
Keon
Sorry.
Coleman, I wanted to say something because if you haven't seen any interviews with him, it's very much worth it. There was a video of him during the combine where he's sitting around with a lot of GMs and they ask him his hobbies, and he mentions golf, and they all are like, "You like to golf?" He's like, I'm not Tiger Woods. I'm Tiger Wish he could," and it was
They
very,
were all
very,
dying.
yeah, it was delivered very well. And, everybody was having a good time with him in the room, which, going into a stressful situation with a lot of people that are already established can be something that's difficult for any rookie, any athlete. But it doesn't seem like he's going to struggle with that element of it. And he's going to be a very good personality in the locker room. And I'm hopeful, anyways, that that helps him assimilate onto the team in a way that, wouldn't necessarily be the case for some other rookies or, for people that are more timid. So sorry, anyways, going into Josh Allen, I'll throw it back over to you.
Yeah, man. He's my number one. He finished number one last year. I mean, we play in a super flex league, so kind of depending on, what your draft position is, whether or not you're gonna get him. I don't really have too much to say on him other than, I think he's just gonna continue to be an awesome fantasy player once again, and hopefully he can get farther in the playoffs and beat Patrick Mahomes. But that's a
Yeah,
prediction.
right. That's NFL related. From a fantasy perspective, I think the last 4 years, since 2020, he's been QB1, QB1, QB2, QB1. There isn't a much more dominant stretch at any position other than maybe Travis Kelce. And Kelsey's getting a little older. We saw maybe a chink in the armor last year. So I think that at quarterback, I think he's no doubt the number one. I think that we're going to be seeing him go first overall in a lot of super flex drafts. Either him or McCaffrey. I wouldn't shock me at all to see him go number 2 overall. In our draft, if somebody wants to structure their team in a different way, or multiple people up top want to structure their team in a different way, then that could push him down a little bit. But other than that, I think he's going to be, or he should be in the top 2 or 3, latest maybe 5 or 6. And he's an excellent performer from a fantasy perspective. Gets all kinds of points on the ground, scores rushing touchdowns, over 4,000 yards consistently, and will rack up touchdowns as well. Hopefully these weapons end up helping him out a lot in the passing game. And we haven't even gotten into the running back and the tight end, which are going to be major parts of the passing game coming into this year. So Allen is just locked in at the top.
Yeah. And then moving over to, I guess we'll take James Cook first. He finished actually number 11 on the year last year. It just
Very
seemed like they
productive.
were going to him on every play once Joe Brady took over as OC. And whether that was passing or running, it just seems like that was the direction that they really wanted to go. And looking at him this year at 15, I mean, unless that game plan is really going to change, like I feel like that's someone I'm going to be targeting quite a bit.
Couldn't agree more. He's one of those guys that goes near, Rashad White, that goes near maybe even Joe Mixon. And it just seems like he's an excellent starting option as your number 1 at that point in the draft. I wouldn't have any problem having James Cook as my number 1. He's going to have a major role. He finished in the top 5 in rushing yards last year too, something I don't think that I ever expected to see anyways. He barely ran the ball in college, and he was just a monster on the ground last year. And I think that gives all the confidence in the world that he should be drafted confidently. With the change in the offensive weapons on the outside, I think he has an opportunity to see even more passing game work. And maybe I shouldn't say more because he had quite a bit of passing game work, but maybe I should phrase it as more consistent. He might be a more established player in the passing game, get 5 targets a game instead of having these blow up passing games and kind of quiet passing games. So I'm really high on James Cook. I think he's a great pick. And again, the reason I think I like him so much is how I generally draft my teams is I'm waiting until that 3rd or 4th round to pick a running back. I'm sorry. So, if I go receiver, 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 or I go quarterback, receiver, receiver, or I go receiver, quarterback, receiver, right? You taking him in that spot as the number one running back on my team in the 4th round, I think is something that's an excellent option, something that I'll be looking to do.
Yeah, and just to reiterate, we're looking at him through the lens of a 3 wide receiver, super flex format. So if you say, hey, you're crazy, he's not going to be there in the 4th, just remember that league setup makes all the difference. And I guess jumping over lastly to tight end, Dalton Kincaid, he was someone that I was very high on coming into last year. I watched a lot of Utah games, saw him dominate. Finishes tight end 12 this year. They've got him pushed all the way up to number 5 right now on Fantasy Pros ADP. I just feel like there's a lot of projection that I'm not necessarily comfortable with that ADP. Dawson Knox is still there. I don't know, man. I know top 2 is in his range of outcomes, maybe even 1. But yeah, finishing 12 and then being pushed up to 5, I'm just a little worrisome. What do you think?
I think that has everything to do with the role that they're expecting him to play. The 12 came when he wasn't even necessarily the starting tight end at the beginning of the year. You mentioned Dawson Knox. When Knox last year was healthy, Kincaid didn't really produce that well. But we got to see a 4-game stretch when Knox wasn't on the field and Kincaid was going nuts during that time. And I think that, even if Knox still plays, I think that Kincaid is going to be playing a lot more on passing downs just in general. I think he's going to be possibly the number 1 option from a passing game perspective on the team. And there just aren't very many tight ends that fit that bill. So if we do hear camp reports that list him as the top pass catcher and that say he is the go-to guy in the offense, I think that he's going to stick in this ADP. I think Evan Engram should be ahead of him. So my personal opinion is that he should be 6 because we just saw it from Evan Engram. I can't imagine that Dalton Kincaid has a best case scenario that was better than Engram's last year. But overall at tight end, I get why he's going here, and he has all of the upside in the world. And I think there's very little downside because I think his role is going to be secure in terms of target share and how focused they are on getting him the ball.
Yeah, I wish him the best. I really like him as a player, and he's actually number 4 right now on Underdog in terms of ADP. But that a lot of that has to do with people building stacks around Josh Allen. But you can kind of see where the betting market is, laying their chips with him. So yeah, it should be a good year for sure.
Yeah, totally agree. And with that, it is a wrap on the Buffalo Bills, and we are complete with the first team of the AFC East. We'll see you guys tomorrow.